Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal, and I'm here with Bill McGurn and Kim Strauss, and we're talking about the Hunter Biden plea deal collapse and its fallout politically and how that's going to affect, if at all, President Biden's campaign for re-election. Immediate news here on Monday will be that Hunter Biden's former business partner, Devon Archer, who has since been convicted himself of a crime, but he has been appealing and is out of jail, and he's going to testify before the House behind closed doors, and no doubt what he says will leak fairly quickly. But, Bill, what is he expected to say?
Well, obviously, we won't know until they release a transcript, but the reports are that he's going to talk about how Joe Biden was involved in his son's business dealings. He participated by speakerphone. Sometimes Hunter would have his foreign associates there at a table, put the phone down in the middle, call his father, introduce the foreign associates to his dad. And there were some meetings in person, some dinners, some meetings. We know from photographs that Joe Biden did see some of these people at different meetings, but Devon Archer was a key business partner, so he knows a lot. And he would know how Hunter structured these deals. Devon Archer would have intimate knowledge of that. For example, one of the claims that was raised in 2020 from the, I think, flag transactions of the Treasury Department was that Hunter Biden had, or a company that he was a co-owner in, Rosemont Seneca Thornton, had received a wire transfer of $3.5 million from the widow of the former mayor of Moscow. Now, we know the wire transfer went through. There was $3.5 million. There's been a dispute. I think the Biden defense is that Hunter was no longer a partner in the firm when the money was transferred to it. But again, that's something they're likely to ask Mr. Archer to expound on.
And Kim, it does seem to me that, Hunter Biden's business dealings and his circumstances are terrible tragedy in the sense that he led such a dissolute life for so long. But the question politically is not just a question of Joe Biden's forbearance to his son in this, is whether or not Joe knew about his business dealings, how much he knew, and whether or not there was any implication that he would be a beneficiary of that. Isn't that the main issue here? And that's what Republicans are looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what I want to know when we see Devon Archer's testimony is how many of these calls or meetings took place when Joe Biden was actually vice president versus the time that he was out of office briefly when he finished being the vice president and was still debating whether or not he was going to run for the presidency himself. That would be one thing. The other thing would be his knowledge of what Hunter was doing, meaning it's one thing if Hunter's got a table of business associates and calls his dad as if it's just like, hey, Dad, how you doing? And he doesn't tell his dad that all these people are listening. You know, he's using his father to sort of show off, look, I can get the vice president on the phone at a second's notice. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Joe Biden was in on it, as it were. Versus Joe Biden specifically talking about business. We know from another of Hunter's former business partners, Tony Bobulinski, that he has called or equated Joe Biden to essentially having the chairman kind of role in a traditional business structure as somebody who kind of nodded and signed off on things. You ran them by him. We're going to get a sense of that. And that's what's going to be really interesting from this Devon Archer testimony. And also if Congress brings in some more of Hunter's business partners, there were several in the end that all had intimate knowledge of the workings of these companies. How much was Joe fully aware? How much of it was there to be a benefit from him? We've long known about Hunter and James Biden, that's the president's brother, their influence peddling, but how aware was Joe himself?
Right. Okay, let's listen to a clip from Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut on MSNBC talking about Hunter Biden.
So let me say something that you never heard a Republican member of Congress say in the 4 years of the Trump administration, which is that if Hunter Biden broke the law he should be prosecuted. And it is clear that he broke the law with respect to taxes and possibly the ownership of a handgun. He should be held accountable for that. If he traded on his father's influence, he should be held accountable for that. And I'm emphasizing this because you never, ever heard a Republican say the same thing about Donald Trump or his family. Now, to the question about impeachment, there is today zero evidence that Joe Biden, the president of the United States, knew about what his son was doing. If he did know about it, if he participated in that, then that is a very different conversation.
A different conversation indeed, Bill, because first of all, I don't think that there's no evidence. As Kim related earlier, there is some evidence that Joe Biden might well have known about his son's business dealings, despite his assertions in the past that he didn't. A little bit of a hint on that front is the fact the White House changed its story on this from saying that the president never talked to his son about his business dealings to the White House saying that the president was never in business with Hunter Biden, which are very different lines. And the White House, of course, has shifted here in that explanation without further elaboration on why, but I think we can infer. But what do you make of Jim Himes coming out? And then there's the first time I've heard any Democrats say that, well, maybe distance himself from Hunter's travails.
Yeah, first of all, I think you make a good point on evidence. Democrats keep saying there's no evidence of any links to Joe. That's not true. There's evidence. It may not be conclusive. It may not be proof. But usually in cases, if you don't have a confession or a videotape of someone doing the crime, you're building a case, and little pieces of evidence play a role. So they might not have proof yet, but there's a lot of evidence piling up that the president knew about his son's business and may have been involved. So I agree with you there. On Jim Himes, he's from a very safe district. I think he won 59% last time in 2022. It's a very Biden district. He doesn't have to worry. I took it more as an attempt to separate the president from his son. I mean, I think they have a hard time saying Joe really didn't know anything about it. If that's true, he was the only man in Washington who didn't. And as you pointed out, they recognize that at the White House. It's not credible. So they had to pull that switcheroo while pretending it wasn't a switcheroo. So I saw Himes' thing more, it was an attack on the Republicans and kind of a defense on Joe. Because the key of the impeachment inquiry, which is what they're talking about now, is that the court show great deference to Congress in fights with the executive branch over documents when it involves impeachment. So I think because of the stonewalling they've had before, remember, the FBI wouldn't even admit there was a 1023 until a week before it produced it. They feel they would have easier time prying information out of the executive branch.
Well, okay, I take your point about Himes trying to separate Hunter from Joe, but I wonder if this isn't a signal of some growing concern by Democrats about all of this. Kim, the Democrats are in an interesting and maybe difficult position in not knowing if something else is going to come out here on all of these business dealings, and that's a very risky place to be. They're putting all of their bets on Joe Biden to be the nominee and beating Trump, but the investigations are ongoing. A lot of this information has come out. I don't think the Democrats knew about it. The shell companies, the $10 million payments, not just to Hunter, but to multiple members of the Biden family. And what happens if more comes out? You know, how vulnerable will Joe Biden be? And I say that because obviously Donald Trump has his own legal problems and they're far from finished. But nobody is better at prosecuting a case against an opponent than Donald Trump. And the danger for the Democrats, I think, is that if Joe Biden is found to have lied about his knowledge of Biden's business interests, or has in some sense, even if it's not illegal, has received money or been in on it somehow, Donald Trump will try to use that to neutralize all of his vulnerabilities on prosecution. And who knows how that is going to turn out.
They should be very, very nervous. I mean, look, we all have, for better or worse, seen real time Hunter Biden's judgment, especially when he was in the thrall of substance abuse, the pictures that were on the laptop, the injudicious messages that he sent. So we know that any level of behavior he was capable of. We know that there are a lot of people who were involved in these business ventures with him that are able, if they attest honestly, to potentially divulge some really ugly things. We also know, and look, here's where I personally have continued to think that the White House is most vulnerable. You had a vice president who was on his way out the door. And at that point, he may well have been debating being in private life for the rest of his existence, not running again for reelection. In which case, after decades of public service, maybe Joe was contemplating doing some sort of business deal.
This would have been in 2016, right?
Yes, 2016, as he was leaving.
Right.
And in those couple of years before he decided that he was going to indeed relaunch a bid to run for the president. Maybe he was contemplating retirement. Maybe he was getting closer to that. The problem, I think, for them is that he's been so vociferous in denying it that now if it comes out that if that 10 for the big guy really was meant for Joe Biden, as you say, Donald Trump is just going to hammer on that, and Republicans will add that to all of the economic problems Biden's still dealing with, inflation, et cetera, his low polling, his age. I think Democrats have every right to worry that Hunter is an enormous liability that's just going to continue snowballing.
Right. And I think so the White House and Democrats are counting on A, more not coming out, and B, if it does, that the press corps will ignore it because the stakes of electing Donald Trump are so enormous. Hope is not a plan. In politics, it's risky. And I know that personally. Hope is not a plan. But there's some risk here. So thank you, Bill. Thank you, Kim. Very good and interesting discussion. Hope our listeners found it informative. We're here every day on Potomac Watch, and we hope you'll be with us tomorrow again. Thanks for listening.